On this week's Talk of Him, we talk about expanding the borders of Zion in the image of casting a net and not choosing who's gathered.
That's right. And we'll also talk about different parables of Jesus and how they can help us understand and appreciate more fully the plan of redemption. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to Talk of Him. I'm Ganel-Lyn.
And I'm John.
So good to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here.
We're going to talk parables.
I love parables.
I do too.
I mean, I want our audience to know that there's no end to what parables can teach us. And so it's like...
And my children need to listen because I analogize everything, and I'm like, I'm just trying to be like Jesus, okay?
That's right.
I can see any Star Wars movie and find a gospel application. That's all I'm saying.
Lord of the Rings.
Or Lord of the Rings, exactly. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about really the idea of expanding Zion. That's kind of where I'd like to start.
Yeah.
Matthew 13, Luke 8, and Luke 13 are part of our reading this week. And so Matthew 13:47, and again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind.
One verse, but like...
One verse.
So much you can pull out of it.
Listen, for me, let me just say this. We started in January really kind of reminding and reframing our audience about what the Come Follow Me program is about. And this show has been consistent with the idea of this is not supposed to be burdensome. Read every verse, analyze all the historical references, and understand maybe all the... If you love that, great. But for me, if you can stop and ponder on verse 47 in Matthew 13 and really find how the Spirit is going to teach you on where the application is, then that's what this Come Follow Me initiative is all about. This is found in our Find Him study guide, that heaven is like a large net being cast into the world. And I often say that for me, divinity is found in our diversity.
Beautiful.
And so often we limit who we think is included or should be invited.
Right.
And I think this is a perfect verse to stop and pause and consider the image of visualizing that a fishing net goes out. And like if you are a fisherman, my brother is, he's often on a salmon boat. He goes up to Alaska and fishes during the season. Everything gets brought in. The net goes in, it gathers everything. Some things that you don't really want, it's not edible, it's garbage in the sea or whatever that is. And so as fishermen are throwing out their net and gathering whatever is there, similarly, our heavenly parents are asking us to cast a net out in our invitation instead of only inviting the straight-A students or the successful businessmen or the people that we think, now that's really who God is inviting to come worship or be a part of the gospel.
Yeah.
I feel like this example it's every kind is gathered, every kind. And that is such a shout out to our diversity.
Yeah. I like to picture when I'm thinking of, casting the net, someplace super diverse like the Great Barrier Reef or something like with all kinds of different fish and animals and everything. And you throw the net and when you pull it in, you've got everything. And like you were saying, the beauty is in the diversity, but we've struggled historically with sort of welcoming in that diversity. And what I mean by, I don't mean like overt prejudice or anything like that. I mean, we inadvertently try to make clownfish more like, you got to come up with a fish.
Okay, well, it's Finding Nemo. So I'm thinking of the Great Barrier Reef scene in Finding Nemo, right?
We take a clownfish and we're like, welcome to our group. But
and
actually,
the stingrays aren't available.
If you're going to fit in, this is what a member of the church looks like. Right? And so we inadvertently, I think, pressure people into, forsaking some of their diversity in order to feel like they fit in culturally. Norms. As a seminary teacher, we have lots of trainings and things, especially in the summers that prep us for the next year and things like that. And I remember it was probably a decade ago. I was sitting in some training and it was we're now going to hear, this was like a first, okay? We're now going to hear a musical number from a choir of students in Africa. And it's going to be broadcast, okay? And I was like, oh, this is unusual. Usually it's like a group of young men and women from
Provo, Utah.
BYU, or something like that. But I'm like, I look up. Screen comes on, shows a picture, and they're all dressed in their traditional African, outfits.
And you thought you were in heaven, right?
And I was like, wait, what? This is so different from the usual script, I'm used to. And I loved it.
Yes.
Even the way they sang was different than what I was used to. And I love that. And I think we've really come a long way in the past decade plus in at least becoming more aware of the beauty of diversity.
Well, and membership is predominantly outside of the United States.
Right.
And so like
we better get used to it.
Right. And we are very proud of our Talk of Him audience because it's global. Like we have viewers from all over the world. And so I think this is such a beautiful example of how we can all get a little maybe tribal because it makes us feel like our school of fish makes us feel safe. Yeah. And God is saying in one verse, gather every kind. Stop assuming that you know who wants to have an invitation to come worship.
Or what they need to look like when they arrive.
Exactly. And in each of our journeys, like it is literally so personal. So how one person is caught up in God's net is going to be different than how maybe someone else gets caught up in God's net. And that idea of like a fisherman who has to cast a line, a net is so much more about belonging and diversity and inclusion. And I think we make sometimes the assumption that like a bold scriptural invitation is going to work for someone else. I'm thinking about Charlie Bird's book. There's this great story of some individuals that are in New York City and how as a non-member, he found belonging in that congregation. Right. And he didn't hold a calling specifically, but he always volunteered to clean the church on Saturdays. And I just think there's space, and are we creating space? And so often we already decide if we're the judge of who's gonna accept and who's not. Right. And I love that God is like, open up your mouth and invite. And maybe it's to an activity. Maybe it's to a holiday service. Maybe it's to, it comes into your mind and you just invite. I know that sometimes where we live, it starts to feel like, well, everyone already knows where we worship and who we are. Right. I grew up in a really diverse, from a faith and cultural and racial perspective, community, and I've done a shout out for my hometown community so many times on the show because it really taught me at a very young age the capacity we have for interfaith, and the Feather River Temple is going there. And I will just say that my not members of my faith friends from high school are so excited to get tickets for the open house. And they're just so happy, not because they're gonna get baptized, but because they're so excited that my temple, they think it's my temple and it's not my temple, is being built in our hometown. And the Sikh family that sold the land to the church in the first place is so excited that there's a place of worship that's on that land.
So cool.
That to me is the beginning seeds of Zion. And so this week, I think specifically, don't skip over that verse and consider maybe where your bias is or where you're like, I don't think they want to be a part of this because, and then I love your example of when there is diversity within our faith communities, it's a better community. Yeah. It's like, I'm better when someone raises their hand in Sunday school and has had a totally different life experience and then has a perspective from that perspective that changes my perspective. Like it snowballs. And so often we can just know the same 30 people and that's all we see the world through. But when we see the world through other people's lenses, that's how God sees it. He sees his children in Africa. He sees his children in Ireland. He understands how there's different life experiences happening. Yeah. And we got to be ready for that because that's what Zion's going to be. Did I say that too many times?
No, well,
I'm preaching
it
and preaching it and preaching it. But
I think this parable or metaphor inherently, the fact that God is the person throwing the net, that implies to me that he's good with whatever comes in.
And like the chosen, get used to different.
Get used to different. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I love parables. As I stated earlier, we're so excited to go through these parables over the course of this year, however many we can get through. But the power and applicability of parables is just, it's inexhaustible. It's endless. Seriously, you can read a parable one day and it means this thing. You read it another day, it means a different thing.
The Spirit takes you in a different direction.
Yeah. I want to look at Matthew 13, 34 and 35. It says, all these things spake Jesus unto the multitude in parables, and without a parable spoke he not unto them. So he was like straight parables in his teaching, so that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables. And then this part, I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world. Now, come on, we can't just pass over that. If I read these parables of Jesus, okay, and I read them with the Spirit, and I don't worry about any commentaries or what anyone else has to say about it. I just read it with the Spirit first, and I look for personal application. And if I come away with some hackneyed, worn out, traditional, I didn't even have to think much about it. Oh, I remember someone told me this is what it means, okay? I've left some beautiful, what does he say? Secret from the foundation of the world potentially on the table.
You didn't turn over all the rocks,
And so please know that if we ever are studying a parable and we kind of walk away with not much there.
I already know what that is.
No, there's something there. We just probably need to revisit it and look at it from a different angle and a different sort of application.
Yeah. I think too, we are a covenant making and keeping church. And I feel like covenant making is symbolic in nature. And I think that is the language of parables. It's maybe the action step when we're making and keeping covenants, that reference in general to a parable and a symbol. There's been recent changes in the church, presentation of the endowment, and in the temples, covenants specifically, I had just a new awareness of maybe, like you said, where after 32 plus years of going, how you can get a little lazy. Oh yeah, I already know what that means.
I already know.
I already know that means. And I think of how President Hinckley was like, every time I go to the temple, I'm learning something new. And it's the foundation and the mysteries of heaven. So if Jesus is saying, I speak by parables, I teach by parables, maybe consider that covenant making and keeping is symbolic in nature as well. And it's got a never-ending application built into it.
I really love that application and angle, likening sort of the skill set we develop as we go through parables, trying to find out personal spiritual applications. You take that same skill set to the temple, and all these metaphors and symbolism that God is teaching us through can just pop with meaning
it's joyful.
and application. I love Matthew 13, 10 and 11. This is where Jesus explains why he uses parables. And I think it's worth noting. The disciples came and said, why do you speak unto them in parables? Like, why not just say it? I can see that.
Just
why not
get
just
out
say it?
with
What
it.
are you trying to say for real?
Stop trying to trick us.
He says this, because it's given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not so. For me, I don't know, I like to kind of try to paraphrase what he's saying and translate it into my own language so I understand. It sounds like he's saying, if you want to find more in the parables, you're going to. If you don't care, you're not going to find anything.
Eyes to see, ears to hear.
Right. I think it's Alma 12 where he talks about this principle of like, if you want more, you can have it. But if you don't want more, you're not going to get any more. As a matter of fact, you start losing what you have.
It's Laman and Lemuel going, I don't understand. And Nephi's like, did you ask? Nephi's like, just ask.
Right.
Ponder on it.
So in the same light, as I've gone through these parables over many years, one potential lens that I like to sometimes take to these, we can maybe illustrate it in Matthew 13, 24 through 30, commonly known as the wheat and the tares, right? And we'll commonly see this phrase, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto. Well, instead of kingdom of heaven, I sometimes like to plug in the plan of redemption. Okay, and it
AKA.
Yeah, it just gives me a different angle. The plan of salvation is likened unto, this is Matthew 13, verse 4, and I plugged in plan of salvation instead of kingdom of heaven. It's likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. Suddenly, if I'm looking through this through plan of salvation lens, I see the good seed as everyone that came to earth, everyone that chose Jesus Christ in pre-mortality and earned this right and this blessing to be born with a body on earth. God sows seed, good seed in a field. He allows his children to be born on earth. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. For me, the tares that are sown down here, planted alongside us that aren't wheat, but sort of the weeds, I see that as Satan and those who were kicked out of heaven and in the war in heaven in Revelation 12 and cast down to earth, right? So here we are together. We got the good seed. We got the tares. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So here we are growing together. We're having a mortal experience next to these tares. So the servants of the householder said, did you sow good seed in thy field? Where did these tares come from? But we were talking in our prep about how
I love this insight.
That's opposition. What's the purpose of these tares? What do we? And he said to them before we pursue that, an enemy did this, and they're like, should we just pluck them all up now? He's like, no. Don't pull up all the weeds. That'll ruin everything. And we talked in our prep about how the law of opposition. You know what I mean? That's the opposition of life created, added to by Satan and his followers is vital to our growth in a lot of ways.
Well, and don't you feel like people I've heard that they get tripped up trying to decide, is that a tare? Right. Is that a wheat?
Right.
Like here we're being told don't be distracted by that.
Yeah,
it's part of the plan.
Yeah.
And it's not who you think it is.
And so he says, don't tear them up, or you'll ruin the wheat. You'll ruin it. Like it's almost like you'll ruin everything. Like no, of course that's the plan, is to have them grow up together. And then I love verse 30 where he's not panicking again. God never panics, right? He goes, let them grow up together until the harvest. And when the time comes, I will say to the reapers, go gather first the tares, bind them into bundles, and then gather the wheat. That's the millennial promise of when Jesus comes, he is more than able to gather tares together and wheat together. He knows the difference. And a recent insight that my brother shared, and someone else, I've heard it from a couple different sources that I really love, is that, don't get caught up. I've heard some people seeing this parable as like wheat and tares is more accurately like our behaviors or our desires in this life. And that's what determines sort of who we are, what we are. I love that. I have no problem with that. Another thing I've been hearing lately is that, like, if you choose right, you're a wheat, but if you choose wrong, you're a tare. And people are like, no. A wheat can never become a tare.
Right.
And a tare can never become a wheat, which is why I like the perspective we just talked about best, because you, me, all of us here on earth are
divine characteristic.
Wheat. We are wheat. We are the good seed that God has planted in this field. And he's not panicking that all this other stuff is springing up all around us, because it's serving a purpose. And when he comes again, we will be gathered.
I think another application of this years ago, I know Elder Bednar has taught it since then, but at a stake conference, Elder Bednar visited our stake conference, and he taught the principle of the garners, or those barns where that wheat is gathered, are the temples. And I think when you think about how we will be gathered and not worrying, as that verse says, that God's going to come in and take care of burning the bundles of tares, then it helps me kind of especially steady that worry heart of what's to come.
Yeah.
And those days leading up to the Savior coming again, where we know, and it's been prophesied, how much opposition there's going to be, that there is safety built in, that there's been a plan put in place for a protection for the wheat.
Yeah. I love it so much.
Yeah.
How about we finish with one more parable, because it's only one verse.
Let's do it.
Matthew 13:44, along these same lines.
Okay.
Again, the kingdom of heaven, or I'll switch it again, I'm just using this lens for this one. Again, the plan of redemption is like unto treasure hid in a field, the which when a man hath found, he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and buyeth that field. Oh, there's so much beautiful symbolism in here.
Yeah, what's the symbolism you see?
When I look at this as the plan of salvation, I see the man as Jesus Christ. I see the field as the earth. I see the treasure that he notices in the field. Everyone on planet Earth that's been born with a body, that faithfully chose him in premortality. Joy that's spoken of, I see that equaling the love of Jesus that motivated him to sacrifice for us. And when he sells all that he has, I see that as the condescension of Jesus Christ to die for us. And when he buys the field, that's Jesus purchasing us. We are his. We are in his hands. And it reminds me of my favorite, I always say my favorite.
It's
I
fine.
say it like
it's
every
fine.
episode. But
it's good that you host a
these are
scripture
top 10.
study.
These are top 10. Doctrine and Covenants 50, 40 through 42. Jesus says this, behold, ye are little children, and ye cannot bear all things now. Ye must grow in grace and in the knowledge of truth. Fear not, little children, for you are mine. I have overcome the world, and you are of them that my Father hath given me, and none of them that my Father hath given me shall be lost. The wheat will be gathered in my mind. And for me, many of the parables speak to sort of a more optimistic outcome to God's perfect plan of happiness and exaltation. And parables especially strengthen my faith in that.
Good application.
Thanks.
And interpretation and translation.
You got anything else you want to share?
No, I think you did brilliant at inviting us to see things in a more expansive way.
Yeah, hopefully we inspired you to look at the parables a little differently this week and as you continue your study. Our invitation for you this week comes back to the gospel net. How were you caught in the gospel net? Think about that. Sharing stories of conversion can not only help one member, but also strengthen others. I know I've had that experience. I'm sure you have too. And so maybe there's a friend or a neighbor or someone that you can find this week that you can share your experience with, and hopefully through sharing, you'll be strengthened and edified together. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We hope you'll join us next time. Talk of Him is brought to you by Covenant Communications.
Make sure you follow us on social media and pick up a copy of Find Him Study Guide at Seagull Book or online.